Moving on to the next item, the evaluation of potential cost savings of part-time mayor position. Start off with City Administrator Ron Gaines.
Thank you, Mayor. Sorry about that, just trying to get set up here. What I have for you this evening's a short PowerPoint presentation with some of the commonly asked questions with regard to this potential cost savings. This presentation is not meant to be all-inclusive, or it's just a starting point really for tonight's discussion. Just kind of go over a brief outline here, and let's get to here. Well, so the history of this particular topic is prior to 1976, this was actually a considered a part-time position. And when I say part-time position, I mean that it wasn't necessarily described in the ordinance as part-time, but the compensation level kind of indicated that it would be a part-time position. And then in January 1 of 1976, the mayor's position was actually classified as a full-time position, and that full-time position was identified in the ordinance. So I'll get into that in a little bit, just with comparison with some other communities. And then this is a little bit of an interesting statistic here, or fact. In 2013, the Budget Task Force came forward with a recommendation, and what gets lost in the recommendation of reclassifying the mayor to a part-time position is it was actually packaged in a bigger reorganization plan, and that reorganization plan started with consolidating 6 departments down to 4, creating a city administrator position, and then along with that was the reclassification of the mayors to a part-time position. The reorganization happened in July 1 of 2014, and the reclassification of the mayor's position has been discussed several times by councils, and during the FY 16, 17, 18 goal-setting sessions, by consensus, the council elected not to take those particular topics up at that particular time. So move on to what I have. I have a slide basically here called legal requirements, and really this isn't again supposed to be all-encompassing on what potential legal requirements could be out there, but these are comments or questions, concerns, since this topic has been raised on what some of the procedures would be. And so under Iowa code, the City Council has the authority to set the mayor and City Council's compensation before every election. So currently, under our ordinance, the mayor and City Council's compensation is set, and there is a provision in there that provides for pay raises for the mayor and City Council, and they're determined by the Consumer Price Index. And so that's essentially automatic until the ordinance gets changed on those two. So if the council wishes or would like to make changes to the mayor or city council's compensation, those changes would take effect in the term following the next election. However, those changes cannot be made during the months of November or December. And so, for example, this is a regular city election year, and so no changes can be made to the mayor's compensation or the city council members' compensation after October 31st of this year. So, and this is an editorial comment from myself, I think that's actually entirely too late. I actually think right now is entirely too late to, again, that's an opinion by myself, but we already have several council candidates that have thrown their hat in the ring, and then also a couple of mayoral candidates that have thrown their hat in the ring. So, so with regard to the mayor's position, and I'll get to this a little bit in the next slide, the law does not require the position to be identified as full-time or part-time. And one of the other concerns that has been posed is Iowa Code does not set hours of work for the mayor or the city council members. So, moving on here, this is a slide that we have that we call Other City Comparisons. And what it is it's 22 of the largest cities in the state of Iowa. And I put this up there because one of the commonly asked questions is, what do other communities do? And so I think it's an interesting reference point, but I also think it gets to be, you cannot always compare apples to apples in this particular case. You have a large number of cities up there that have elected, for one reason or another, to their compensation level for their elected officials. Sometimes those cities vary greatly in the state of Iowa with population. And the other column that we have there is the form of government. So the other thing that gets to be difficult to compare apples to apples is the form of government each community may have. And even equally important is once you get down below that form of government is the structure in which that government is. So I'll use our neighboring city of the city of Waterloo. They have the same form of government. However, there's a significant number of departments that are direct reports to the mayor, which is much different than we have here. We have 4 departments and 1 direct report to the mayor, which is myself as a city administrator. One of the other things I'd like to point out is if you notice that the couple of asterisks there, in our research, Cedar Falls and Ottumwa are the 2 cities that by ordinance mention full-time or part-time mayor. Obviously, the 1 asterisk is full-time, and the 2nd asterisk mentions part-time. So those are the only 2 that we actually found within all of the cities that we briefly researched. Now, we didn't do a whole lot of in-depth reading every ordinance book, but what we found so far is that those are the only 2 that indicate if it's part-time or full-time. Great example is Davenport. Davenport did not mention, it only mentions mayor by ordinance. It doesn't mention part-time or full-time, but the correspondence we received back from the staff is that it actually is a full-time position. Again, this may be some good, useful information when you're just looking for a quick comparison. But again, comparing apples to apples, a lot of times it's not that easy to do. I will. So here's I have a couple more slides to go through, and before I turn it back over to the mayor and council to begin some of our discussion. But one of the things that I wanted to point out here is maybe this seems like we're oversimplifying it, or I'm oversimplifying it, but and I don't want to do that because I think this is going to be an important conversation, and maybe equally important is the result. But one of the things that I think we need to do is maybe break this down into 3 separate questions. At least that's, in my mind, the way I've done it. And the first 3 questions are, the first one is, what's the financial savings that we could actually realize out of this? And that'll be easy to calculate once, if there's a change in compensation, you can see the existing, and then the change in compensation, you can see what that particular value is. The second question that may be more challenging and more difficult to figure out is, what is that intrinsic value you have of having a mayor? What is that value that you have for the citizens in the community to have a full-time mayor? And so to take the first question in the actual savings, and then the second question of that intrinsic value, and try to say, does that savings offset the cost, is going to be very difficult to do. Maybe the third and more pressing question, or the final question, is, what is the right fit for Cedar Falls? Sometimes we look at what the right fit is, and you start to look at all of these other things that we talked about, and is the right fit for Cedar Falls having that full-time mayor? I think it would be very difficult for me to stand up here and argue that a part-time mayor could not be successful in Cedar Falls. You see part-time mayors all over the state of Iowa, all over the Midwest, all over the country, actually, are very successful in their communities. But I also think it's very important to point out that the last 41 years, Cedar Falls has prospered with a full-time mayor. So I think that's is a great argument in the fact of what is the right fit for the city. So move ahead here and just real quickly so we can get to the discussion. Kind of our next options are, is if there's no action, things remain the same, full-time mayor position. At the end of your discussion this evening, if you want to direct staff to come back with some additional information, we can do that and present that at a future committee meeting, or if you wanted to direct staff to draft any ordinance with changes for consideration, we would do that and then present that at a city council meeting for consideration. And then I will leave you with kind of our last, or my last recommendation. If actually there are going to be any proposed changes, that they would not go into effect until January 1 of 2020 or later, just because giving candidates the opportunity to prepare for that or understand the office they're running in. And I guess that, in a nutshell, Mayor, is...
That's fine, Ron. No, appreciate that. I think you'll obviously be available, or staff will be available for any sort of questions or input council may wish to call upon for you. Thank you for that. Before we get to the discussion, I'd like to be just a couple of brief comments, and be careful not to sound like this is self-preservation. This is clearly about the position of the mayor of our city. I'd start by asking why we'd upset the apple cart for our city to move forward in that position to go to part-time. We're a special city. Cedar Falls is doing great as structured. I wonder why there'd be a drastic change in leadership that would be necessary. Our form of government works. There are checks and balances in place between the council, the mayor, and the city administrator. And the full-time position is important as it relates to Cedar Falls' interaction with citizens, Cedar Valley, the state and federal officials. And ultimately, I believe the council will simply need to trust the citizens to vote in that right person and allow that person to operate basically in their own strengths. So clearly open it up for discussion for this evening. Anyone wish to begin?
Well, I guess I'm the one that let the cat out of the bag, that this was something that we should be considering. And honestly, I just haven't made a final opinion at all, but I think it's something really that we should talk about. And the reason I think we should is, I think the list that Ron put on the screen, there are some cities that are growing very, very well. And I don't know, not necessarily, not that we aren't. We're doing very well. And this is certainly not personal against you, Mayor Brown. You've done a really good job. It's very nice to come to a meeting and know that some of our citizens aren't going to get too exuberant. And I like that. So it's certainly not personal in any way at all. But it's something I do think we should certainly take a look at. I think we should discuss it from time to time. I really do. I look at Ankeny, I look at West Des Moines, some of those, they do have a part-time mayor, and they're flourishing. They're doing very well, as are we.
Very good. Mr. Tiber?
Might hold the floor for a little while, if you don't mind, because I wanted to cover some points. I handed out a code summary, okay, and I think it's worthwhile if we go through. If anybody else wants to see it, please do. But let me just preface this. John and I did not collude. We didn't talk about this at all. We are of the same mind because we voted on this exact same topic in 2013, and we elected at that time to defer for, I guess, reasons that aren't necessarily rational or necessary to bring up today. But basically in 2013 and 14, we talked about the need for political leadership as well as administrative leadership. And today, if you look at the code, we've delegated responsibilities to staff, but the powers remain the same. And so there's a clear conflict, and that's what I've tried to illustrate in the code that I pulled out I think it's worth noting that we have the second highest paid mayor in the state of Iowa. And I also, to back up Mr. Runche's point, the full-time mayor doesn't necessarily imply causation. We have outstanding staff. We have great citizens, and I think our councils have done a very good job too, unbiased. The papers that I put in front of you, there's red, there's green, and there's some yellow, okay? And I'd just like to go point by point, and this is what we're evaluating tonight. It's what does the code say, and then what's the proportional compensation for what the code says, right? Now, it's true that the citizens have a referendum every 2 years. That's true. But that's a referendum on sentiment and how they feel the city's going. To say that the mayor is responsible for the success or the vitality of Cedar Falls, I think is only telling part of the story. And so I think we have to bear that in mind. It's very, very difficult for our citizens to vote on the administrative or else the professional efficacy of the mayor position. So I just wanted to make that clear. So the first power is really concerning, okay? It's in general, the mayor shall have all the powers conferred upon by sheriffs. This is the chief police officer in our city. In fact, he's the highest ranking police officer in our city. And if you look at his duties for, or his or her duties for restriction of alcohol, weapons, explosives, curfews, the mayor can limit assemblies of 3 or more persons, evacuations, restrictions. I don't think that power should be bestowed on anybody without professional counsel. So I think that's a reasonable one. But the sheriff actually has the ability to arrest any one of us in this city. Okay. I don't think that's a qualification necessarily that the mayor should have. So then you get into the section B, and that's specific powers and duties. Okay. Red, again, is what I've declared as being redundant and having a duty conflict. So the mayor shall supervise all departments of the city and give direction to department heads. This is in direct violation of the powers that we've delegated by code to city staff, mainly the city administrator, but others. So that's a duty conflict. We should probably eliminate that. I think we all agree on point number 2. The mayor shall be the presiding officer at all city council meetings. Okay, we get that. Power 3. Okay, the mayor has veto power over the council. Now, the council can override, but I think we all agree on that. Power 4, the mayor shall make appropriate provision that duties of any absentee officer be appointed. That, too, is probably redundant because that's now a power that's held by the city administrator. Power 5, the mayor shall represent the city in all negotiations in accordance with law and ordinance. That, I would argue, is not somebody that we can just elect and bring in and negotiate multi-million-dollar contracts. It just doesn't seem reasonable to me, not in the complexities of the world that we operate in today. The next one, Power 6, is yellow. And the reason why I note that as yellow is because the mayor shall do this, but it's based upon council action or council direction. So Power 6 is the mayor shall, whenever authorized by council, sign all deeds and contracts. That's that huge book that we get every single council meeting. Okay, we approve it, the mayor signs it. There are a lot of things that the mayor, by code, must sign. Again, it's procedural. Power 7, the mayor shall make such oral written reports to the city at the first meeting of every month. I think that's done by all the staff today in our staff booklet. Okay? So I think that's, again, procedural, and we don't get regular oral or written reports at the beginning of the month. Okay, Power 8, the mayor shall annually prepare and submit to the council an itemized budget of revenues and expenditures. That's been delegated. Duty conflict should be eliminated. Power 9, the mayor shall designate one member of the city council as mayor pro tem. Okay, we all agree on that. That's procedural. That's the third power that we all agree on, I think, without debate. We're doing good. Power 10, the mayor shall, upon order of the city council, secure for the city specialized professional services not already available to the city. Again, this is kind of procedural. Council normally provides direction there. Power 11, the mayor may appoint an administrative assistant. I don't know if we've done that in a long time. Again, that's procedural. That has to be a budget item. I have to follow council direction. Power 12, the mayor shall sign all licenses and permits. We already approved that. Again, that's procedural, one of those signature items. And power 13, the final power that's enumerated in our code. The mayor shall order in writing the removal at public expense any nuisance. This is a power that's rarely ever used. If you go through code, and yes, I went through the excruciating task. It was a tedious task, but thank goodness for searches. Missing from Chapter 2, Article 3, Division 2 is the mayor is responsible for appointing board and commission members. I think we all agree that's a power that we bestow upon the mayor, and then of course that's approved by the council. The authorized restrictions, that's a power that's not listed in the duties, but boy, it's scary, the fact that we could have martial law tomorrow. And power 3 is the annual performance evaluation of the administrator. I think that's actually a very important power that we should have enumerated in the powers division. There are two other minor ones related to additional duties and election duties, but to me, that's the crux of the problem. So what are those 3 powers that I've identified, and maybe the 2 other powers that are listed in other areas of the code worth to the city, okay? And how do we recognize, how do we put into some kind of definition what our expectations are for the mayor? And the mayor's actually done an excellent job of listing a lot of those things that he has done and previous mayors have done to justify the position. But right now we have severe code redundancy, deficiency, and I think that's what needs to be improved. Maybe that conversation needs to start before we even talk about compensation. But that's what I wanted to say. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Mr. Blanford.
Thank you, Mayor. There's a few things that I think are important to address. First of all, I just wanted to touch on a couple of things that Councilman Tabor raised. First of all, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ron, but I believe the section about having the powers of a county sheriff, I believe that's a state law. Is that correct, Ron? That's assigned or taken from state code?
I know we have our city attorney actually researching some of those right now. So to know if, I don't know that we have that right off our fingertips.
The next section in regards to supervising all departments, I guess to me it's not a redundancy, it's a measure of accountability by having our mayor whose office is kind of the de facto chief executive officer subsequently oversee the city administrator, who is the chief operating officer, and therefore the staff. I think that's a measure of accountability that our citizens expect. I think it gives them the opportunity to interact with a full-time executive who's here all the time, who can oversee city operations and who can provide that responsiveness to the city. In reference to the negotiations on behalf of the city, there's a subsection there that you included that says that the mayor shall not represent the city where this duty is specifically delegated to another officer by law or ordinance. So to me that's self-correcting. We have the ability to delegate negotiation power to a specific staff member or another entity if we so choose. For example, I think for our collective bargaining agreements, we hire a vendor to handle that for us. So I don't really see that as a conflict. In reference to preparing the budget, to me that's a function of almost all executive branches of government. I think you see that both local, county, state, and federal, where the executive branch prepares a budget. Now it is done with the assistance of staff. There's, any level of government has that, and then the executive branch, which is headed by the mayor in this particular case, presents that. I don't think that's out of the realm of reasonability at all. So I think that's important to note. There are a couple other things that I think are important to mention in regard to the mayor's role and function. First of all, I think one of the prime tasks that the mayor's office has is that of our leader in the sense of an emergency. I think we saw that in the floods of 2016, where the mayor was very active in overseeing staff operations and communicating with the citizenry and really serving as that point of contact. I think it's important that the person we delegate that power to is here enough to know what's going on. It's going to be very difficult for somebody who's a part-time mayor, who's not able to interact with all the city departments, who's not familiar with what's going on in the city, to then subsequently step into a high-tension and high-risk situation and oversee all of operations. So I think that's something we really need to consider in this particular case. I think it's also important to note that the mayor is the face of the city, whether that's meeting with local constituents, Earlier last year, some of our city staff and the mayor went to DC and met with a number of departments, including the Department of Transportation, and staff shared a story with me where they were communicating with an undersecretary for the Department of Transportation, and the response that they got when the mayor came in the room was vastly different from the response they got from city staff. So I think that office carries weight. I think it's important, not only locally, but as we represent Cedar Falls everywhere. And I think having a full-time mayor that really understands that job and can really go out and communicate our position is very important. So I think beyond what is just delineated in the code section, I think there are other factors that we need to take very seriously before we consider making a change like this.
Thank you, Mr. Blanford. Anybody else? Mr. Murr?
Just a quick question. I'm at a disability and that I can't read a lot of this that's in red or green, but it looks like it says on here that the salary is $61,000 as of January 2000. Can you just explain to me how it got up to the $89,300?
Sure, I can do that. Ron mentioned it briefly, that every year what we have is kind of that automatic raise based on the Consumer Price Index, CPI. So over the course since 2000, there's been those increases each year that is based on a percentage. So for the mayor and the city council, every year, January, they're usually the first meeting in January, we have on the agenda what that percentage increase is and what the new amount is. So this really would be, why it's up into 80,000 now would be like 17 years of those CPI increases.
Right. Okay, so when this was rewritten back when we had formed the city administrator position, was this not also updated? Is this the most recent copy of this that we have?
Correct. We did not change the method that we were going to do in terms of salary when we created that city administrator position.
So the whole definition of what the mayor's duties was not changed? Or just that one line in here was kept over, rolled over?
I don't know if I know, Ron, exactly what was changed in 14 without going back and looking, I guess, at the old ordinance and the new one when we did it in 14, what we changed, unless Ron knows that. I don't know off the top of my head. But that's something we can sure look at and compare.
And my last question, this was brought up simply originally for financing, as far as for benefit or cost. If we were to also add to these requirements anything, I'm curious whether other cities have done this, is any requirements that the mayor's position bring in any grants or alternate funds? Is that done by any of the other cities?
I don't think you can require.
I know that our mayor has worked hard on getting grants. I'm just wondering if we made that as a requirement, would that offset then their price analysis that they're looking at?
I'm not the city attorney, but I don't think you can require an elected official to bring in grants.
That power isn't conferred by state code as part of the enumerated duties of the mayor, and as an elected official, I don't believe that you could make that conditional on some sort of income generating function.
I believe that potential redundancies in the code might be good to take a look at. The referral, strictly speaking, was for discussion as it relates to part-time mayor and the savings, or at least the study from 2013. So I'm not sure staff is on their toes in relation to the codes or code comparisons and such. There are reasonable powers, what I've learned within the city, and Councilman Tiber mentioned a couple of them. One example or two examples is that the mayor has the authority to pull items from an agenda once staff brings it forward. And council can override that judgment, can override that action. It's a good check and balance. Or the veto was mentioned as well. Council has good opportunity to override that veto. So where there may be the authority in the position does not necessarily mean there's the ability to carry that through, and I think that's what works well for our city. But moving aside from the codes and the colors and such, I wouldn't mind if that's carried through to see what staff looks at. I think a later date would be ideal. I think, as Ron had mentioned, it's the intrinsic value of the position of mayor as it relates to cost savings and moving it part-time.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
I agree. I think there's some things here that I don't know that you do or would want to do or would need to do with other staff. I guess I'd like to have this could be an opportunity for us, rather than looking at making someone a part-time mayor, identifying more specifically what we as council would like our mayor to be doing. And I'm not saying you're not already doing a lot of it, but I really, and this could be blasphemy, I don't know, but I'm excited about the potential of the Cedar Valley, Waterloo and Cedar Falls in particular, being more collegial, working more together towards the future of the Cedar Valley. Each community can maintain its identity, yet we're going to be better together. And I think our current mayor and the mayor of Waterloo have demonstrated over the last 2 years that you can build a positive friendship, and from that friendship, do good things for both communities. And I think there's a lot, since I've been on the council, I know council gets real tired of me talking about, well, we have all of these plans in place. We've got a Vision 2025 plan, we've got a comprehensive plan, we have a complete streets plan, we have all of these plans. But every time we bring something forward, it's like we are reinventing the plan, when in fact all of that stuff is there. We need somebody to monitor, are we implementing the long-term plan that we have for this community, or is it just something that's laminated and put on a shelf? And so I would like to see us look at, sure, let's see what we can save. And if we can save enough money that's going to help us hire 3 more public works people or something, that'd be great. But I don't think that's going to happen. And I'd be more concerned about what we lose by not having a person in that role. But I do think we should take advantage of this opportunity and better define what our expectations are of a mayor making that kind of salary. And I think Jim's up to the task, and or any other mayor if they're when someone else comes along. But I think we should go ahead and look at this part-time makes sense, but I'd rather look at how do we make it a legitimate full-time job that we can document.
Mr. Renci?
At some point in the evening, I would like to, there are 3 former council people in the audience. I know at least how one of them feels, but I'd like to hear the others. And
We can certainly.
some citizens that I really have a lot of respect
I'll
for.
be more than happy to
Love
call
to
them
hear
up.
from.
Yep,
Thank you.
after council discussion. I'm going to say one quick thing to Councilman Dara, because I've thought about the potential for expectations. And I guess the simple question would be, what if those expectations weren't met? So someone comes on board and it could be someone totally opposite from what a council person expects that mayor to do. Then what, I guess, would be the main question. The other is what happens in the future when the council changes. Again, that gauge and that measurement. So that's just my only sort of insight. That would be a real neat crystal ball to get that up and running and have it be
I guess
sustained.
my position would be the mayor's not in it alone. Not necessarily that the mayor would have to have all the skills themselves to do it, but have the insight to realize I can't do it by myself, but I have skilled staff, I've got council to work on those things together, and that provide that kind of leadership as well, where you bring the expertise of the other elected officials on board as well. And again, something I think you're perfectly capable of doing.
Thanks. Mr. Tiber? Sorry, Dave.
I'll try to circle it back to pay then and cost savings. But I guess the first thing that I think we need to recognize is that this position is at risk every 2 years. And so you have to look at this person coming in, potentially being new every 2 years. And when citizens are voting for mayor, they're not necessarily evaluating a mayor's ability to negotiate great contracts. Okay, this isn't Donald Trump. They aren't looking at the mayor and his ability to, lead in times of grave crisis. It's unrealistic in the first 2 years because the mayor, it took me a few years just to learn every aspect of work. And so you know, I think that's unfair to actually put that responsibility on the mayor, so therefore it should be removed and delegated to emergency management and budget professionals and so on. But I think it's important to point out, again, this kind of comes down to uncertainty, and there's a lot of mayors that work part-time, or it's unspecified, that do an excellent job, that do a fantastic job. And guess what? They hold other jobs too. And right now, I know that we've all heard this before. To be mayor of Cedar Falls, you need to be either retired, independently wealthy, or underemployed. Okay, that limits your pool of potential leaders in this city. Now, I will mention this too. There are some amazing risk takers too that are willing to put their life on the line and run for political office and eliminate all career opportunities while they do it. But I think that's unrealistic. I don't think that happens that often, so I'm going to scratch that. You're either retired, you're independently wealthy, or you're underemployed, okay? That narrows that pool too much. If this was a part-time position, and by the way, if it's full-time, I'm expecting 40 to 80 hours a week, okay? It's a real job. Then we should say it. We should say, you know, minimum expectation. We should have office hours, maybe fixed by code. We should, with granted some flexibility, but, you know, these are things that we should also be discussing. But to be, you know, to have an argument about part-time or full-time, you know, we're one of four, if I'm counting Davenport, that offer this. And the salary isn't $90,000 a year. It's $90,000 plus very lucrative public benefits. You know, maybe it's $30 a month for health care and an attractive IPERS pension. I think there's, help me out, folks, there's life insurance, disability. There's all, I mean, the list is nice. Davenport does it. It's a full-time mayor for $45,000. They're on track to do great things. So I think we don't need to talk ourselves into full-time or part-time mayor. What we need to do is, you know, try to determine, you know, what do we want this mayor to be and how much we want to pay, because there are no guarantees of performance in this job.
Mr. Whelan, did you have a comment before?
Thank you. Well, I've got a few comments. I've been
Okay.
kind of quiet listening to everybody. First thing that I'll say is it doesn't matter whether you call them part-time or full-time. That isn't the issue here. The issue is, what do we pay the mayor in Cedar Falls? Nick has said we have a very poorly written job description. I don't know how we decide what we pay him based on what I've seen tonight. The mayor looks external to the city of Cedar Falls. He's our representative to the people, and the people enjoy visiting with him, and they come and they volunteer to do good works for the city of Cedar Falls. The city manager works internally. I've heard the city manager runs the city council if you have a part-time mayor. That's absolutely not true. Council sets the goals for the year, and the city manager follows those goals. I've been on this council for long enough. I've only once seen them not follow the goals we set, and that was the 2008 flood, when they just took action that needed to be taken, didn't wait for approval. Heck, they knew they'd get it. So right now, we don't have a lot of information to make a decision on what the pay of the mayor should be. And I certainly am not ready to do that tonight. We don't need to do it tonight. We've got 2 years to look at this, to get the corrections made that Nick's brought up, so that we have something to look at. And then we'll have to look at measurable goals that the mayor could have. We're going to have to look at those that are not measurable. What is it worth to have him in a position supporting the innovative projects that we're doing in Cedar Falls? Would a new city manager or new mayor come in and support those same innovative projects? And by the way, you can look at our goal setting, and you can see we are envied by many, many cities who wish they had the goal setting that we do. So we want to make sure we have a mayor that continues to do that sort of work for us and supports those. Nick kind of alluded to that. You get a new mayor, he might go off on a tangent for a year, not knowing what to do yet, because it does take 2 years to get going. So I'm in favor of simply, first step is just to direct staff to get additional information, to make the corrections that Nick's brought up, and to add anything that council would like to add to it.
Mr. Blanford, you had a comment after. Were you done, Mr. Whelan? I'm sorry. Thanks.
Just a couple more things. First of all, in reference to your point, Councilman Tabor, about what people are evaluating when they're voting, quite honestly, I think it's a bit hubris for us to sit up here and say what people are evaluating when they're voting
got
for a
an
mayor.
opinion.
I think everybody who casts a vote is going to be looking at something different. I don't think there's a single person who votes for the same thing. So I think it's going to be impossible for us to say, well, this is what people are looking at when they're evaluating a person for the office of mayor. I don't see how we could effectively do that. In reference to who would run for the office, the concern I have for somebody, a professional who's doing something else, is a potential for conflict of interest. I think it's going to be very hard for somebody has another job and who's also serving at the mayor. The office of mayor is so diverse and has so many other responsibilities. I don't know how you could avoid the potential conflict there. Now, in terms of cost savings, I guess my question to this would be, we've already spent probably a month's worth of staff time evaluating and studying this. I would be curious to know how much money have we invested in it already? And if we continue to debate this over the next 2 years, we would have, because it takes a lot of time for staff to be contacting other cities to do that kind of intensive research. That's a pretty big ask if our goal is to be offsetting costs at that rate. And then just to the comment about office hours, and the mayor touched on this a little bit, but I'm not sure how that would, I don't know how we would establish that, because I think the job, again, is very variable. I think on Monday you may have 8 to 5 because you've got meetings all day long, but on Thursday you may be attending a community event at 7 o'clock at night. On Friday you may have a 6 o'clock meeting at Intercog. I don't know how we would establish those in any way that's measurable and that anybody can oversee. I don't know how we would oversee that on a daily basis and to what good it would do, to be quite honest with you.
Before we move on, I'll speak to that very briefly. Council may recall when I first started, when I had the position, sent an email what I thought would be a job description, maybe a little naive, because 6 months later I told you here are some things that had changed. One of those things that had changed was office hours. I tried from 1 to 3, and folks don't have the same time off that other folks do to have a 1 to 3 office hour structure. The other was different work with business development and such. So it was nebulous early on, but clearly I wanted to make sure that job description you folks were aware of and asked for any sort of input, adding, subtracting, or maybe some new ideas. So just to let you know that, very aware that office hours are hard to nail down. So, Mr. Burr, did you have a comment?
Well, I see Stan Smith waiting to speak, and I'd like to yield to Stan.
Okay. Any further discussion before we move further? Mr. Smith, do you have a time constraint? Sorry, Mr. Skeen, you can certainly go next. Hopefully we can keep the comments brief, and the microphone, and name and address, please, for Lisa.
Dan Smith, 3221 Pleasant Drive, 24 years on the city council, former Mayor Pro Tempore. I want to thank Mr. Tiber for a beautiful lead-in for what I'm about to suggest. You want to clean up the code. You want to get half the pay for the mayor. I got a different suggestion. Instead of cutting the mayor's pay in two and having him do the same duties at half the pay, I have a better idea. Why don't you get rid of the mayor entirely? You don't need him. You don't think you do. So get rid of the mayor, and I've already done the arithmetic. In just a little under 9 years, you can save enough money to buy another unneeded roundabout.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Mr. Skeen, please. Hang on. I'll get to everybody. If we go long, we go long. We'll have it to the top of the hour.
I won't take a long time, but if you bear with me on what I have to say. You have the wrong agenda item today. It should be evaluation of the cost savings of eliminating the city administrator. The city administrator position was never legally created. Ordinance 2824 was passed on third reading on June 23, 2014. The vote of the City Council was 7-0. 2824 changed the form of government from mayor-council to council Management Ward. The forms of government are contained in Iowa Code Chapter 372. 372 stipulates that in order for the form of government to be changed, there must be a petition and an election. Because there was no petition and election, Ordinance 2824 is null and void. When challenged, City Attorney Moore said that the city administrator was nothing more than the administrative assistant provided under the mayor's ordinance in the Cedar Falls Code. So, in fact, Cedar Falls does not have a city administrator. The city administration position was never legally created and so does not exist. If the cost to the city administrator, who is paid much, much more than the mayor, were eliminated, Cedar Falls would save a great deal of money. And I have a document that I'm prepared to share with
If you hand it to Bob there, he'll get it to us all, Mr. Skane. Thank you. Mr. Bell, did you have a comment up here, sir? Name and address, and we get you on file.
My name is Bill Bell, lifelong resident of Cedar Falls, 30-year employee of the Cedar Falls City. My present address, like so many people that go south in the winter, well, I go north in the summer. So I'm presently residing in Nashua, Iowa at our summer home. The discussion of a part-time mayor, and Mr. Gaines alluded to the right fit for the city. And 41 years as a full-time mayor. And when he said the right fit for the city, you can't compare apples with apples. I think that was a very, very good statement. My thought on this is that for 41 years, we've had a full-time mayor, although probably, as it was alluded to by Mr. Tabor, that it's never been actually documented as a mayor full-time or part-time. And I think, my compliments to all of you who serve as mayor and the city council to try and do the best that you can for the city. However, I look at the old adage that government is for the people and by the people. You are by the people. And the citizens of this community, I think if you are considering to make it a part-time position, should have a say-so in that. And each one of you is representing the citizens of this community, I think certainly would not have time to contact every individual in your ward. However, the way to do that, if you would so decide, I think it should call for a referendum vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bell. Thank you for your service. Rosemary?
Good evening. I've listened very happily to this, and I just have, as you know, something to say. I would like to just say to you that if you go to a part-time mayor, I'm running. I think I'm the person that should be there. I have a lovely personality. I know a lot of people. I ran a historical society for 13 years. I've worked with nothing but volunteers. So if you're going to do that, let me be it. I can enjoy a half-time work, part-time work. I will not know as much as a mayor knows because I won't have enough time to learn it. But that's okay. I can answer the phone. I can be pleasant. I can do a lot of things. But I don't have time to learn how to be mayor. But you'll like me because I won't make any decisions. I won't help anything along. Nobody will give me the opportunity to go to city council and talk to them. So I want you just to think how you would like an 82-year-old woman as mayor of Cedar Falls part-time. So what I'm saying is, why worry about it? If it's not broken, don't fix it. Now, my campaign manager back there will take all, if you want to give money, I'm good for that. If you want to sign a petition, I'm good for that. But just look at it. We've had a great town. Don't screw it up.
Thank you, Rosemary. Anyone further? Go ahead.
All right. Well, my name's Trey Steffen, 807 West 13th Street in Cedar Falls, and I've just been jotting a few notes down as we converse, and I've met, a few of you over the last couple of years and gotten to know you, some of you very well, and I will say that, leadership starts with the council. It has for years in the city of Cedar Falls. But I do think that we're missing a little bit of the point of what leadership really means to any organization. And Cedar Falls is an organization. First of all, to compare Cedar Falls to Des Moines area, Ankeny, and some of those places that have benefited from just the geography associated with where, the Des Moines area is probably not fair. I think you also have to look at staff size and what they have to work with from a resources standpoint there as well. So I'm not sure that that's really fair. And also, every 2 years, we talked, Mr. Tiber, you said every 2 years we could potentially, it's at risk and you can have a new person in there. And we've had a couple statements about how it could take a couple of years for you to get to know the job. Well, let's just consider that 1976, I think, the late Mayor Cruz, who did a phenomenal job, I think that was about the time that he came into office. And during that time, we only had, 6 or 8 years of breaking in a new mayor during that entire stretch. So it's to say that it happens every 2 years is not really probably accurate, but it could. And so I think that really if you were to get down to what we're talking about here today is, what do you want the mayor to stop doing if we change the job? Because, in my world, we don't ask somebody to do the same job for half the salary. And when you mentioned, Mr. Tiber, that, you have to be independently wealthy or you have to be retired to run for it, I think the good salary is what actually allows somebody to step up and say, I am going to pursue that position because I think I can make a difference, and let the people of the community speak and be able to elect that person because they can actually afford to live on a reasonable salary. Now, is it too reasonable? That's something up for debate. I think that, but what we're arguing about is a decision that was made in 2000 with how we were going to say, we're going to use the cost of living index and set that position. So do we need to look at that? Do we need to restructure that? Maybe we do. But I don't think you do that just by saying this year, 2 years, with 2 years after we had a change of longtime leadership in the city of Cedar Falls, with just 2 years behind that, we're going to completely change the mayoral position and turn it into a part-time right now over the next 2 years, so we're only 4 years removed. That seems like something I would want a considerable amount of debate to think about what we're actually doing to the leadership of the city of Cedar Falls, which, as many of you mentioned, has worked pretty well so far. So just think about that as we make our decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Steffen. I see other hands back there, Mr. Haggerty. And
Tom Haggerty, 809 Franklin. Disclaimer, I am not running for any office, so I'm sorry to be here again. What I'd like to point out to you is take you back to 1976. The state of Iowa sent a representative up here for a look-see at Community Main Street. And his recommendation was to bulldoze the east side of downtown Cedar Falls and start over. Well, fortunately, we didn't do that. And as was alluded, we had a full-time mayor start at that time. He championed this town, both downtown and other sections. Since then, we've had a very successful southern industrial park. We've also added a very successful northern industrial park. And I believe you have to have a leader who is out there selling the city of Cedar Falls. A part-time leader will not be doing that. And as I shared with you on an email recently, and it's been alluded to, every 2 years, if I don't like the job that the mayor is doing, I'll vote him out or I won't vote for him. And the same thing every 4 years with the council elections. If we don't like what our ward council rep is doing or our at-large, we have a chance to vote for that. We do not have a chance to vote for that city manager, and that's the difference. And I think I'd strongly encourage you tonight to put this issue to bed and continue our status with a full-time mayor. Thank you all very much for the job you're doing.
Thank you, Mr. Haggerty. Was there another one? Come on up, Mr. Fairbank.
Craig Fairbanks, 405 Spruce Hills Drive, Cedar Falls. I do support the mayor form of government, mainly for one reason, is that there has to be some separation, some representation of the people by a person who's maybe outside of the administration of the city. We have to have somebody to go to. However, there's been a lot of good suggestions about reevaluating the position and seeing exactly what that job description is. I guess I hadn't even considered it, but I try to separate the city administrator from the mayor, and I don't know that I can do that right now, other than one's numbers and one's running the city. So, like I said, I support the mayor form of government. I think it's necessary, but we would expect that they represent the people first, instead of being a yes vote for the staff. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything further from folks in the audience? Yes, sir.
I'm here again.
And your name and address, please.
Gerald Himes, 315 Washington Street. And I believe that the mayor is doing a great job. Well, let's keep him in for full time. The mayor, for instance, Cruz, every place that you went, John was there. He got paid nothing. He got his salary doing it, but he was at funerals, he was at weddings, he was at every place that he represented the city. And that's what our mayor does, and which Jim Brown is doing a great job. And I feel that, like Joanne said, I believe her name is Joanne, if it don't break it, if it's broken, don't break it. Leave it as it is and go from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
Thanks for the good job that you're doing, y'all.
Thank you. Anyone further? Yes, Bob.
My name is Bob Manning at 2908 West 3rd Street in Cedar Falls. I've been a lifetime member of the Cedar Valley also. Now, I'm not independently wealthy, and I'm only partially retired, and I don't remember what that third component was, but I probably wouldn't fit that one either. I did note that as we're talking about salaries, the city administrator in Des Moines is making about $200,000, so that position commands a lot of dollars and a lot of knowledge. But we used to refer to, in my business, where there were hunters and there were growers. They're the people that stayed home and did the growing and paid attention to the details, and there were people out hunting for new business or the food to eat. And it takes different types of skills. And we never in a bank wanted to have all hunters or all growers. We wanted to have a combination of people. And I think by job descriptions, the city administrator and the mayor represent those two different components. And so I think that that's important to consider. I would like to drill down on a couple of things. The CPI, using the CPI index for salary increases is a problem I would have. Government too long has tied to indexes, and that has been part of the problem with inflation that we had in the late 70s and 80s. Now, we're very lucky that we're down to the 2 to 3% inflation point right now. But when we reach those higher numbers, a 10% raise for anybody can be very expensive to the payer. And so I would encourage the council to look at that CPI index, tying that to the mayor's salary, and come up with a different, whether it's 50% or something. I understand where you perhaps don't want to vote on that every year because it can be very political. It's nice to have something that's automatic, but having it tied to the CPI is one of the problems, from things that I've read, is part of the problems with big government. So I'd encourage you to look at that. The other thing I noted is the city council salaries in different communities are substantially more. The Des Moines City Council people got a $4,500 raise a couple years ago to $26,000. Now their mayor is only earning $52,000 to $55,000. So maybe we ought to bump up the council. Maybe you guys aren't pulling your weight, I'm not sure. But maybe you ought to bump up your salaries and look at those job descriptions. But probably more important in business is to look at the job descriptions and the titles and the responsibilities of the mayor and review those periodically. To have those set and to not review those is not something that we want to do in business. We want to take a look and reevaluate and reset goals and objectives and job descriptions periodically. What we used to do in banking in the 1970s is not what we did in the 2010s. Those things change, and I would encourage the council to review some of those job descriptions. My last thought is that, there's a good one. Rosemary already covered it. Don't rock the boat, where the ship seems to be sailing in a pretty good way. So thanks for your work.
Thank you, Bob. Anyone further? Sid, coming up?
I will be very brief. My name is Sid Morris, and I live at 5026 Sage Road in Cedar Falls. Served on the Board of Adjustment, Planning and Zoning, the City Council, 18 years on CFU. I have seen a lot in this city over the years, and I see a lot of good things happening now. And if you just look at last year, our permits broke a record. $151 million in development. This year, also last year, there were 151 homes built in Cedar Falls. Why would you want to change the leadership when things like that's happening? I respect everyone on the council and admire you all, but I want you to know that why would you disturb that at this time? Thank you very kindly.
Thank you, Sid. Mr. Runcie?
In light of the overwhelming support that my idea has generated, I suggest we kick this can down the road and discuss it at a future date, asking the staff to come up with a little more information. Go ahead, Nick.
No, finish your thought and then I'll make a formal motion.
It's pretty well complete.
Okay. So I'll make a motion to direct staff to evaluate certain code changes, including duty conflicts, and maybe organize so the powers are a little bit more clear, including those that are unspecified. That's number one. Number two is to maybe incorporate this in the pay study that we're going through so we can get a better idea of what this mayor position compensation ought to be, considering the powers and comps, other public comps. Number three, that no changes go into effect before 2020, so it doesn't impact people's current intentions.
I second that.
It's on the table, if I understand correctly, motion for staff to look further into the code. Do you have those written down, Lisa, with their specifics? Just as related to Mr. Tiber's handout? include the mayor for the pay study and no changes till 2020. Was that your last?
Well, whatever's, yeah, I think that's the recommendation.
Motion second, Mr. Blanford.
I guess I just have a question in terms of directing staff. I'm not sure that's enough direction for what they should be doing. I guess I don't know that they can just take this and say, okay, we're going to go through the code section, we're going to decide this is redundant, this isn't, this we should include. I'm not sure that we can give them that direction right now. I don't know.
You're directing the question to me, but it came from Nick, so I'm going to defer to him.
Well, I've gone through the arduous task of going through and trying to compile where I believe the key duty conflicts are, where there's gray space, and then what's clearly a power and duty of the mayor. And so I think we've been pretty specific. I don't know that there was much disagreement with any of them. I mean, we could have some back and forth, but why don't we wait until the code comes back and then we can discuss that.
I would even recommend that staff use input from Council Tiber, since he put that much work into it.
Do we want to put some metrics out there? I mean, I think everybody's pretty comfortable with former Mayor Cruz and the amount of effort and energy he put into things. I think everybody got pretty comfortable with that. Not to say anything bad about Mayor Brown and the time and effort he's putting into it, but do we as a council want to put some metrics out there, or are we leaving the door open here? Because I think some of that direction, it would probably have been beneficial to a new mayor coming in. Well, here's what the council expects.
I would agree.
I don't necessarily want to go too far with that either, but.
I might respond. Codification is one thing. I think we ought to work on that secondary goal too, and that's to define maybe in greater detail. I mean, I don't know that we want our mayor to attend 36 different committees. I don't know that anyone can be effective on 36 different committees and still do the job. So maybe some of that's what do we do less of, right? Is that an expectation? I know that there's certain positions, Cedar Valley Alliance and others, that are kind of implied that the mayor will serve. However, maybe that's something that we need to identify. So anybody running for office has a better idea of what the expectation is. Hard to codify some of these things, but certainly I think that we can make an effort to come up with a one-pager of, sample duties and responsibilities. So I like that idea.
Mr. Dare, did you have a comment?
I just don't want to let go of the role of the mayor championing, if there is such a word, goals of the city, like the Vision 2025 plan. That's out there, that 40 residents of this community spent collectively several hundred hours putting together. And it does provide a vision for the city, but we really, as a council, don't connect to it very well. And it just seems to me having our mayor kind of monitor where are we at, how are we implementing that, and that is a direct service, I think, to the citizens that participated in that goal setting. So that's some of the softer skills that, yes, we've got to have a code and all of that, but I do think identifying some general responsibilities of leadership, and some people do it naturally, and some others need to have it. Here's what you need. Here's what we expect you to do, and that would be an expectation of mine. And I just like to make sure that that's in there for some future discussion.
Mr. Blanford?
I'm just wondering, being that the discussion has been focused, or was originally focused around part-time versus full-time, do we need to include that in our assessment, that we want it to remain full-time, we don't want it to remain full-time? Does that need to be, do we need to specifically state that when we're redrawing this ordinance, we want this to be a full-time position?
That's, if I may, Mr. Mayor?
Sure.
That's one of the reasons I think we ought to continue the discussion a little bit more open-ended, because I'd like to hear what the other citizens, there are other citizens out there who do think maybe a part-time mayor is worth consideration. And I think we should at least allow them the opportunity to speak. And this is something, if we keep it open enough, we can discuss it at a future date. We don't have to say yes or no at this time, in my opinion.
But still, with a 2-year, an expectation that in 2 years we'll have it nailed down? Is that what you're thinking? Or but still with some sort of deadline.
Yeah, oh yeah, I think we should talk
Like,
about it.
so
I don't
that-
necessarily think that we should go to a part-time mayor at all, but let's refine
Right.
what we consider we would like the mayor to do. Not that we even have the power to determine what his job is going to be. But we would like to ask that he do these things.
Sure.
If I may.
Yes, please.
As part of the conversation as this moves along, I think it's only valid that we note some city administrator or city manager pay in some of these other cities as well. That was one thing that wasn't on here, and I think, from what I've seen anyway, it looks a lot more, it looks a lot different when you see the city administrator's salary on there as well, because I think there's some administrators that are making $250,000, $300,000 where they've got a part-time mayor. So those roles and responsibilities shift somewhere.
And in some cases, some of those cities even have deputy or assistant and city administrators in addition.
So just to try and keep the apples, talking the apples, I guess, because it wasn't real clear on here.
Sure. Mr. Tiber?
Just for the avoidance of doubt, I don't think that we should discuss raising council pay at all. I know that a lot of people want to get paid for, attending weddings. I'd love to. But I'm taking that off the table, okay? It's only about the mayor position.
Any further conversation to this motion?
Do we want to set a deadline for this motion, or how do we want to?
Well, I was going to bring that up. It's the tasks now from the original motion per procedure. Now other things have been added. There's two concerns for me with that, and maybe for yourself as well. Number one is the time for staff to put these together. We're now into August committee meetings and council, unless you folks decide to request a special meeting is concerned. And some of these topics, if we don't get to them, I believe in August we already have a couple of high-level discussions, Main Street and fireworks. We're now into September. The timing per other candidates I know who are here for council and for mayor, frankly, it could be pretty close and maybe a little disingenuous in terms of bringing that up.
Haven't we considered having maybe a council work session on and off Monday? Would this not be a good thing for that?
Well, that still bodes to the time for staff
Oh, for
to
staff,
put.
I see what you're saying.
Right now, the
You
motion
weren't
is.
concerned about my time. You were concerned about staff.
So the three things in the motion formally, then the expectations, metrics, full-time, part-time discussion, and apples to apples in terms of more information. So all these things kind of working, not necessarily for us in terms of timing.
Would, goal setting always seems to be a good place to have this kind of discussion. Would it be feasible to have our next discussion about this at goal set? I mean, that's still November, so that's
It's after
3,
the
4
election
months.
as well.
It's after the
But it would
election.
be, it wouldn't be such a rush that staff would have to do it right away. So I wonder if just adding it to the agenda on goal setting.
Well-
That could be a significant part of goal setting.
And I see two things there. It would need to be, I believe, pulled from the original individual who brought it up, Mr. Rogers, or both, or if that was to be tabled or off the table, and something new for the goal setting to have these things listed beyond the table.
So far, I think what we've got procedurally are three matters originally raised and seconded, having to do with reviewing the mayor's duties, clearing conflicts so that the mayor's powers are clear, incorporate this analysis into the pay plan study currently underway, and that no contemplated changes would be made until 2020. That was moved and seconded. Then there is further debate without amendment. And so I think those three general areas are on the table right now to be acted upon unless there's an amendment made to the motion to refer.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Burr.
Follow-up question to that is our current code pretty well set by state code as far as what our mayor's position, definition, and requirements are?
In our preliminary research, very few mayoral duties are specified in the Iowa Code. Far more duties are specified in the local ordinances for the mayor's duties.
Mr. Tiber?
I just recommend that we vote on the motion and sort out the timing later. I think if we pile this into goal setting, it's disingenuous, because I think goal setting, it doesn't have the exposure and the focus that this type of discussion needs to have. I think it's better that it be.
Folks, hearing no amendment and having three things on the table, it has been motion and second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay.
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 That motion does carry. Thank you for the good conversation. Appreciate all the involvement, especially those folks in the audience this evening. Item 3 is a motion to approve just the bills this week.